Good evening, friends. My name is Scott Couper, and I'm the minister of Centre Congregational Church here in downtown Brattleboro on Main Street. I'd like to welcome all of you here into this space. Centre Congregational Church is a just peace congregation and an open and affirming church. And we are so thankful that all of you have gathered here for this very special presentation. I only want to say that this partnership, this collaboration with the Friends of the Brooks Memorial Library is very much personally inspired, institutionally inspired, and spiritually inspired. And I say this because personally I'm a huge fan of Starr, Tronica, who heads the library, and I very much would love to participate in anything that she has to do with. This partnership and collaboration is also institutional in that the library and Centre Congregational Church really share a lot of the same values, especially as it regards being vibrant and very relevant to this town and its community. And last but not least, this partnership is inspired spiritually because the subject matter as well as the author who is presenting to us comes from a faith perspective. And so all of these things really make me quite proud to be in partnership with the library, a host to Katherine Paterson, and also a wonderful and sacred venue for this event. I pray all of you feel welcome. Enjoy the evening. Thank you.
I must say, it is lovely to see all of you this evening. And I can feel the big smiles behind those masks. From ear to ear, the love is reaching all the way up here. So thank you for coming out tonight on this rainy evening for this wonderful event. As with any event of this magnitude, there are a lot of people to thank. And first and foremost are your friends and mine, the Friends of Brooks Memorial Library that have sponsored this program. Also, many thanks to Scott and Marion and Peter and Anne and Judy for their generosity and their hospitality this evening. And I need to thank the Brattleboro Literary Festival, which has been a supporter of this event, Candlewick Books, and Everyone's Books, which has the books for sale in the foyer. And now I get to introduce two people that do not need any introduction in this room. When I first moved here, I knew I was moving to a rich area of children's talent. I knew that Karen Hess lived within a stone's throw of the library. I knew that Eileen Christelow lived out there somewhere in the woods nearby. And then I met Anne Braden, and I was just amazed. And yet, I knew, I was always conscious that someday I might be in the same room with Katherine Paterson. So you know all about her. You know that she's a 2-time Newbery Award winner. You know that she is also a National Book Award winner and was an ambassador, one of the early Children's Laureate ambassadors for young people's literature, appointed by the Librarian of Congress. So you know plenty about Katherine Paterson because you've also read her books. And to read a person's books is to know that person on some level, on some deep, rich level. The other person I get to introduce is a person that I'm lucky enough to see almost every day. And that is my colleague, Lindsay Belleville, who is the wonderful leader of the children's section at Brooks Memorial Library. And I know you guys all know her. So. If you don't know her, your children or your grandchildren or your neighbor's children, they all know Lindsay. So tonight, I am delighted that I get to watch both of them in action. And Lindsay will lead Katherine in conversation. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Starr, and welcome everyone. We're very excited that you could be here and join us this evening. Katherine and I were speaking about what we were going to talk about this evening, and we felt instead of doing a lot of planning and rehearsed questions, it was going to be more of an organic conversation. But the one thing we were thinking is we would start with a reading from the book to sort of set the mood for everyone.
When I'm making a speech, I have it in a big black notebook, and my husband had a note there that said, "Is the bike adjusted? Do you have water? I love you." And he died some years ago, and I really missed that note from him. And I found an old one, and I just put it back in the notebook. But I'm very happy to be reading from this book. I've not like some of my friends out there who have so many ideas for books that they'll never live long enough to write them. And I finished a book and I think, well, that was a great career while it lasted. But I'll never write another one. And my family used to get worried, and then pretty quickly they just start rolling their eyes. But when you get to be my age, you really do think it might be the last one. So I'm very happy to have this book come out, and I hope people will love it. They may or may not, and I've gotten kind of used to that. So anyhow, it's called Birdie's Bargain, and I'm going to read the part when Birdie makes her bargain. Her grandmother was back at the door. "You haven't eaten all day," she said. "Let me fix you something. What do you want?" What did she want? It was what she didn't want. First of all, she had never wanted a little brother. But mostly, she didn't want her daddy to go to Iraq and die. She hadn't wanted terrorists to hit the Twin Towers, and all these years later, there were still terrorists everywhere. Everybody said so. She didn't want to go to bed every night wondering if she'd wake up in the morning. She didn't want to die, and she would. Everybody did. People pretended that you wouldn't. Or they'd say, only when you're really old and don't want to live anymore. But that was a lie. Why did grown-ups lie all the time? Reverend Colston at Bible camp said it was against the commandments of God to lie. Gran was still waiting for an answer. "I'm okay," Birdie lied and turned her face to the wall. Well, God should know that lying was different for kids. Sometimes they just had to lie. She stopped herself. Suppose God was listening. Well, of course God was listening, stupid. God heard everything. She didn't mean she was so sick of the world that she wanted to die. No, she just wanted everything different. Why couldn't God roll back history backward as well as forward? Why couldn't he go back to September 10, 2001 and fix things so the next day would be an ordinary sunny day in the fall and not the start of 2 wars and horribleness. If she was God, she would sure run things differently, like press reset and let a new story take the place of a terrible one. God wasn't going to do anything of the sort. Okay. So he wouldn't start over like with Noah and the flood. But couldn't he just let someone in her family win the lottery or something so they'd have enough money and mom didn't have to go to work while daddy was overseas, so they wouldn't have to move to Gran's because rent on the apartment would be too high, and she wouldn't have to start in a brand new school where she didn't have any friends. The thought of that, being alone and friendless when God knew perfectly well that she was shy and had a hard time making friends. Remember that first summer at Bible camp? The rock inside her that had kept the tears dammed up broke loose. She began to cry like a baby, so loudly that she was sure her grandmother could hear her through the walls. She pulled the covers as well as the pillow over her head and cried into the black cave they made. When the flood finally subsided, she wiped her nose on the pillowcase. Of course, that was it. That was what she had to do. Birdie sat straight up on the bed, then hesitated. Maybe with something this important, she had better kneel down and show God that she meant business. Reverend Colston always said it was good to kneel down when you prayed. It showed you were humble before God. Birdie got down beside her bed. The covers tickled her nose, but she'd make the bed up after. Now she put her hands together like the praying hands picture they hang in the churches. Okay, God. No. Dear Heavenly Father. That was better. Dear Heavenly Father, I'll stop acting like a jerk if you'll start acting like God and take care of us for a change. No, erase that part. I'll get up right now and start acting normal. If you'll, I will love you in Jesus and be a witness in the world if you will just keep my daddy safe, okay? Deal? Promise? Love, Birdie. Amen. Slowly she opened her eyes and stood up. Light was pouring through the one small window onto the floor. Light. I am the light of the world. Jesus said that. It was like Noah's rainbow, a promise. God was telling her it was a bargain.
And I think that just shows even stories written for children, a good story is wonderful for everyone. So often we have adults come in to the children's room looking at our books and we're like, you can check them out and read them too. It's okay. Because amazing stories like that, adults should get to enjoy it also.
Well, people ask children's writers, well, when are you going to start writing for adults? Obviously you've done your duty to the kids. And, who knows? You might be good enough to write for real people. just makes me, it used to just infuriate me. And then I thought, no, it doesn't say anything about me and Karen Hess or Eileen Cristolo. It says something about somebody that asked that kind of question, because it shows they don't have respect for children. You know, the Bible says that where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. Where's our treasure in this country? It's not in our children. So don't kid me that we value our children. When we start spending as much for kids as we do for bombs and guns and armaments, then I'll begin to believe it.
And so often adults will remember books that really impacted them when they were young. You know, like they can appreciate it as an adult. I remember when I read that and it made such an impact on me, and not make the connection that these kids that are reading these books,
Yeah, and
this may be the book.
And you know, of course, we're children's writers are the lesser breed, but I feel so sorry for adult writers. I mean, how many of them have books that the readers have read over and over and over again and saved and passed down to their children and grandchildren? I don't know a lot of adults. Maybe Jane Austen.
I bet you get better fan mail. Because who wouldn't want, letters from 10-year-olds saying how much they enjoyed a book, or teachers saying how much a book impacted one of their students.
Yeah, it means a lot.
Exactly.
It does.
Yeah, so all the people who think, oh, well, you're just a children's writer, missing the point. I think you play a very important role in
Well, I'm
children's
just so
lives.
grateful I can do it. I really am. Because I want to, when you start out, you don't know what you can do. And I just sort of fell on my feet.
And I was reading something that you said, in the beginning you were just here and there when you had time, while you were raising your children, you started writing. Have you found that your writing over the years changed, like the way you wrote? Or do you still formulate and jot things down? I'm always interested how writers really become writers.
Well, I get very embarrassed when people say, what is your writing process? As though I had a process.
Right?
Well, of course, you spend X number of hours every day writing. And I think, I started writing seriously writing when I had tiny children. I just wrote around interruptions I still just write around interruptions. And people said, well, I'm going to write a book when I have time. And I thought, no, you're going to write a book when you have the nerve. Because time is something that we all have, but choose to use in different ways. And I figure, 15 minutes a night, that's not bad. Or 2 pages a day. You have a book at the end of the year if you did that consistently. But it takes a lot of nerve to put yourself out there. And I'm always surprised because I am kind of a timid, shy person. You don't know that because I'm also a performer. But a lot of performers are shy, timid people. And so it surprises me that I actually have the nerve to write. And of course, every time you start a book, you think, oh gosh, how do you write this book? Because each book has to teach you how to write it. And the book you wrote last is not going to be any help to you on your next book. So
It's its own thing.
Constantly starting all over again, learning how to write. And when my husband died, it was just the time when the editor that I'd had for 40 years, and not many people have the same editor for 40 years, but I was one of the few blessed people who had a wonderful editor for 40 years. And when she was no longer able to edit and my husband died, I thought, well, that's it. I'll retire. And I wasn't really even sad about it. I've always thought of myself as more of a reader than a writer anyhow. I'll have all the time I want to read now. My writing always interrupted my reading. And then I had this trip to, well, I was never going to write a memoir, but the only thing I could write when my husband was sick was just stories of the family that I wanted to make sure that my children knew, because sometimes you think your children know a story and they don't.
Exactly.
And it's very important, all of you out there, to write down family stories for your families. I don't care if you publish them or not, but do write down stories that you want your children and grandchildren to know about your family. But anyhow, so I started doing that, and then I thought, well, that's it. I've got that done, because I wanted to do that before I died. And then I had this wonderful trip to Cuba, and I got so excited about the literacy campaign of 1961 in Cuba that turned Cuba into a totally literate nation in 1 year. Wow. And volunteers, and most of them were between the ages of 12 and 18. And I thought, do Americans know about this wonderful campaign? And so even though I'm not Cuban American, I'm not Hispanic in any way, don't even really speak Spanish, I wrote a story about the brigadistas who turned Cuba into a literate nation. It is still 99.8% literate, and our last count was 84% for this country, and it hadn't changed in 10 years. So we got a way to go.
Yes, we do.
And then there was Birdie, that I had been trying to write a book about a kid who was standing on the street. I just had this picture of a kid standing in the middle of the street, watching a car go down the road, turning the curve, and she's standing there bawling her heart out, and she's wearing a T-shirt that says, "I heart Jesus." And I thought, what in the world? And I tried several false tries trying to write the story of this child. And as I often tell students when I'm talking in schools, one idea doth not a novel make. You've got to have more than one idea that somehow magically fits together in order to weave the fabric of a story. And so it wasn't until I began thinking of my own experience as a shy child who had to move from school to school to school, town to town to town. And because I was shy and new, the predator.
Yes,
Got me.
always being the new kid.
And I have a lifetime of predators, and the only way I got rid of them was moving again. And one of the girls who took hold of me and made me her friend so that nobody else would be my friend was a pathological liar. And I thought, poor Birdie. That's what I'm going to give her.
Yep, and that became the character.
No.
Her friend in the story. So with this one, I read in the acknowledgments that you actually had gone to England, and that's when you had some time.
Oh, yes. Well, this was, I never thought I'd write another book, but I'm on the Board of Trustees at Vermont College of Fine Arts, and their writing program for children and young adults has a semester in England. And I said jokingly to the director, "How do you get in on that?" She said, "You want to go?" And I said, "You bet." So I went with this group of students to England, and I thought, well, I'll go to the lectures, but I don't think I should go to the workshops because I should, I'm not a registered student. It wouldn't be quite fair to the students who brought work to work on. And one of the instructors said, sure, you can go to the workshop. It'll be fun. And so I had to pretend I was writing a book. and he gave us some hints of, you're supposed to write all your ideas on these little Post-it notes, and the whole book is like a play in 3 acts, and it was a really good schema. And I thought, what in the world? I don't want to. Oh, the kid standing in the middle of the street with a Heart Jesus T-shirt on, and the pathological liar. And they came together in their workshop. So I'm just getting books ready to send to people in the workshop to thank them for helping me write yet another book.
We're all very lucky that you took the time and headed over there.
Well, it was great fun.
And as we heard in the passage you read, this character, Birdie, is dealing with some very intense situations. Her father going to war, having to move, not knowing anybody. And I think a lot of times adults are surprised that children's books have such intensity, and like your Bridge to Terabithia. But like you said, it's really important for children to experience these things because there are so many children who are going through similar things and living them.
Well, I like to think of books as a kind of practice. You could go through emotions through the characters, and you can cry when a character dies, but you know that it's all right, But if you don't meet those emotions in a book, then when you have to meet them in real life, which all of us will have to, then you haven't practiced. And I got a letter from a young man who was a college student, and he had gone home for the holidays, and he couldn't wait till his best friend, who had gone to a different college, to get home. And then he got the word that there'd been an automobile accident on the way back, and his friend had been killed on the way back for Christmas vacation. And he said, I went to my bookshelf where I had my books from when I was a kid, and I took out Bridge to Terabithia and read it again. And I can't tell you what a comfort it was. And I thought, well, if no one had given him that book when he was 10, and if he didn't know it, then it wouldn't have been there when he felt the need for that kind of comfort. And books can give us a lot of comfort. They can, make us feel that we're not alone. And a wonderful writer whose name is escaping me in a minute talks about the role of fiction and the role of story is to heal and illumine. And I think, isn't that a wonderful way to think about story? That it's to heal us and to illuminate us. And sometimes we have to have the light shown on things we'd just as soon not see. But books can do that for us.
Exactly. They can put us in someone else's life so that we can experience it
absolutely.
and, when needed, reflect our life to us.
Yes, yes.
Be that comfort.
Mm.
My last question, one of my other questions is, looking at your body of work, you've written different types of books. You've done chapter books, you've done some picture books, you've done nonfiction. How do you make a decision of a story that you feel should be one thing, or do you just get this idea and say,
Well,
I'm going to do this one now?
well, as I said, I don't have a lot of ideas, so I have to take whatever idea comes along.
30 plus books.
Well, I mean, come on, I've got friends half my age who've done that many, at least. And I've been working at it I decided the other day that I started writing seriously when my older son was born, and he's 57 years old. So obviously I've been at it for a long time. But it sort of depends on what's happening in my life, or what seems to be a need, mostly for me, because I don't know what the world needs. But I know what I need to do at that moment. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. And then I think, did we have a part at the end that we wanted to read?
Am I allowed to? Okay. Let's. I love to read out loud. I hope you're.
I always feel that it's special when you get to hear an author read their work, because then you're really hearing the authentic voice in which it was written. Like when we read, we all have that voice in our head, but to hear the author read it always adds that layer.
This is the very end of the book. Birdie opened the drawer of the small bureau and took out her I Love Jesus t-shirt. She hadn't worn it for months, but somehow she wanted to today. The old dinginess had been scrubbed away, leaving only a faint trace of pink. Gran had suggested she put it in the dryer, so now when she pulled it on, it felt soft against her skin. She patted the faded heart. "Daddy is coming home today," she whispered. "Home for good." Daddy had been home for short visits, but today he was coming home to stay. His face was almost back to the way she had always known it, and he was walking really well on his new leg. "I'll be on the ski slopes next winter," he had bragged, but Birdie didn't care if he never skied again. Skiing could be dangerous, and she just wanted him to stay safe. Mom had gone to Washington to help him get ready to leave the hospital. He could continue his PT closer to home from now on. As Birdie finished dressing, she felt a pinch of longing for her green sweater. She had felt almost beautiful in that sweater, no matter what Alicia had said. But God loved all his lost and lonely children, like Gran said. So surely his heart had reached out to Alicia. Maybe he'd wanted her to have something especially nice, like Birdie's favorite sweater. She and Gran decided they should take Billy with them to the airport. It would be easier to leave him with Mrs. Sheldon. Still, even with all the hassle of the stroller, all three of them should be there to celebrate. But Elizabeth, no matter how much he carries on, begging to get down, do not let me weaken. We simply cannot be chasing him all over the airport. Birdie buckled Billy into his front-facing big boy car seat, while Gran folded the bulky stroller and wrestled it into the trunk of the Subaru. "I shouldn't suggest this, Elizabeth. Would you sit up front? I can't drive safely if I'm always craning my neck around to talk with you. Birdie loved talking with Gran. She got in and buckled up. It was one of those bright, clear, late winter mornings after fresh snow, when the sky is so blue and the earth so white that you are filled with the wonder of creation. As they drove, Birdie thought of her flight to Washington so long ago, when looking out the airplane window, her eyes had been dazzled by the rainbow halo on the clouds. Gran, did I ever tell you about this amazing thing I saw the first time I flew to Washington to see Daddy? No, I don't think so. What thing? Gran clicked the signal to pass an out-of-state driver who seemed to be staring out his window at the snow on Mount Hunger as they poked along at 45 miles per hour. Birdie waited. You're never supposed to distract a driver. As she watched Gran skillfully make the maneuver, she suddenly realized that she had been wrong. Gran wasn't plain or even just pretty when she smiled. Gran was beautiful. Not the kind of beautiful Mom was, but her own Gran kind of beautiful. What were you about to say? Gran said when they were safely past and in the proper lane. Well, you may remember, but I was sort of nervous about that trip. She waited for Gran to say something light. Of course I remember, but Gran didn't comment. So Birdie continued. It was a wonderful day, just like today. We were really high up over the clouds. I looked out the window and I could see the shadow of the plane on the clouds. But it wasn't just a regular shadow. I mean, around the shadow was this kind of rainbow, like a halo. It was so gorgeous. It just took my breath away. She stopped to take a deep breath before she went on. After it disappeared, I thought maybe it had just been my imagination. Oh no, Elizabeth, it wasn't your imagination. Gran glanced over at Birdie, who saw excitement written all over her grandmother's lovely face. This is so wonderful, Gran said. You saw a glory. A what? Birdie thought she'd heard wrong. A glory. That's what scientists call that iridescent phenomenon you saw. It's one of the most beautiful sights in the heavens. Gran, in the Bible, when people see a glory, they know that God is, well, it's like God is right there, showing himself to them. Do scientists know that? I should think so, Gran said. Why else would they call it a glory?
What a beautiful imagery to end such a wonderful story.
Well, I must say, when I discovered that phenomenon is called a glory, I thought, well, there's my book.
And then I did have one other question, because in the book, Birdie goes with her family to Burlington from Brattleboro.
Oh, yeah. Well, she has to move from Brattleboro to an unnamed town, which looks something like Montpelier. But I wanted to rearrange the geography and make the school different. So I didn't name it.
So how'd you pick Brattleboro to be her starting point?
Well, Brattleboro's a really nice town to be from, isn't it? And she was happy in Brattleboro.
She was very, very sad to leave.
But she had to move to this mysterious unnamed town.
Where there's an airport.
No, she had to go from that to the airport.
Right.
So it's not Burlington.
Yeah.
She doesn't live in Burlington. She has to travel to the airport in Burlington. So she's kind of in central Vermont, but we're not naming the town.
So, do we have some questions that people would like to ask?
We promise to let you out by 8 o'clock.
Questions or comments? Yes.
You read aloud so well. Can you hear me?
No.
You read aloud so well, and I'm just wondering if you read aloud to your children much when they were younger, and if you had any favorite titles that you remember sharing that.
What is it?
That you read aloud so well. Did you read out loud a lot to your children when they were little?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. Yes. I was, in many ways, a less than perfect mother. But I did two things right. I loved them a lot. I read to them a lot. And so, in fact, my youngest, I'm sure you all never had teenagers who had problems, but she was very unhappy in high school after her 3 siblings had gone away. And so she was telling me all the things that were wrong with me, most of which she was correct about. And she wound it up with the worst possible thing, and that was, and you never read out loud to me anymore. She's 16 or 17. I gave her War and Peace for Christmas because she was the biggest reader in the family. But I never read aloud to her anymore. So I think the lesson of that is never stop reading aloud.
Exactly. It's magical no matter how old you get to have someone else read to you.
And whole families, can read aloud together. That's what families used to do, not just watch TV or everybody go to their own rooms and work on their things, but they sat around and read. There's some people out there.
We'll start here.
Thank you so much for being here tonight. And your mention of Brattleboro, I look forward to reading Birdie's bargain, but I was so comforted as a returnee to this area to see Brattleboro referred to in Liddy. I don't know if you can hear me.
You can tell me.
She was very happy to see Brattleboro referred to in Liddy.
If you could repeat the question.
Yes, well,
Repeat the question for everyone, if you could, please.
I live in Vermont, and so places in Vermont do tend to get into my books if there's. No.
Yes, it really gave me such a strong sense of place.
Yeah.
Speaking of reading out loud, since you love to read out loud, do you create audiobooks from your books?
Good.
Do you create audiobooks for
They
your
won't let me
books?
do it. They say I'm not a professional. I asked if I could. I said, I can read my own books really quite well. They said, no, you wouldn't want to do it. You're not. Well, you see, sometimes I breathe at the wrong time or whatever. So I asked, but no. So I have to have an audience. Thank you very much.
I read to my children every night that I'm with them. And my first 2 set of children, I also read to every night that I was with them. And it seems that both of the sets of children are infatuated with and love the Madeline series of books. I was wondering if you're familiar with the Madeline series of books. What is it about those, do you think, that children particularly resonate with?
I'm not familiar with that series of books, but I do know children love series, and since I don't do that, as I said to my husband, I'll never get popular until I can do a series. But I just can't. I mean, you do what you can, and that's not something I can do. I seem to have to start all over again every time. I did connect Liddy with Chip. There's some overlapping characters, but as one of my sixth grade reviewers said, it is not a sequel, they're connected.
When we heard you were coming to town, I asked our 50-year-old daughter if she was familiar with your books. And she said, well, yes. When I was in 5th grade in Green Street School in Brattleboro, Flo Nestor, our teacher, read to us Bridge over Terabithia. And then when my husband and I read it, listened to it, we both got kind of sad. We didn't expect to be so moved ourselves by the emotion that you were able to bring forth in that story. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. The story of this little girl whose father is about to go into harm's way it's unique, I think, somewhat unique to a military situation. Unfortunately, we've had a lot of conflicts in the last 30, 40 years, but relatively few families are going through this, without the draft and all that. I'm just wondering if you personally have had any situation in your own family where someone in your family was going off to war and the children were affected by the fear of their loved one going to war.
Not in the military. When we were in China, very often my father would leave us in Shanghai or a safer place and go back across a number of enemy lines to go back to our home in Huai'an. So I knew that kind of anxiety as a child of your father going through battle and you don't know, there's no way to even get mail in those situations, so you don't know if he's safe or not. So I had that kind of anxiety as a child, but my father served in World War I long before I was born, and he lost a leg, which I think is one reason why that happens in the book. And he also was gassed, and he was supposed to die when he was 40. He lived to be 89, but that was my father. And my brother was in second, he was a Navy pilot, but he got his wings very close to the end of the war, so he wasn't actually ever in combat. My sister's husband was in the military. He was in the Air Force as a career, and he served overseas. So she had that anxiety, which of course was secondhand anxiety for me, but not a close one.
Well, I think it's a very important thing that you brought up, and I think it's I appreciate the fact that you had brought this up, because that does affect so many families. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming. Could you share with us some parts of your childhood where you became interested in storytelling, which carries through to your own ability to tell stories.
So he'd like to know about your childhood. Do you have some stories about you enjoying telling stories as a child?
Well, let me expand it a little bit. When I was growing up, one of four boys, my father was a working man, and he would come home at night, and we would all jump in bed with him in the dark, and he would show the figures, the shadowy figures on the wall of the various characters, and there'd be a story. And I think that storytelling has resulted in all of us having a little imagination, shall we say.
Well, we people are storytelling animals, aren't we? I grew up in China and in the South, and you're always storytellers. You know, I was surrounded by storytellers, and I loved to tell stories. When I was in the sixth grade, I think, I would write plays, and we would act them out on the playground. That's in the days when you had recess. And I mean, I'm sure I don't have any copies left. And I wasn't really a writer as a child. Most people who grow up to be writers started being writers very early. But I was a reader. I wasn't a writer. In fact, when I'm at school, I say, "Would you like to hear my first published work?" And they usually say yes. I say, "Pat, pat, pat. There is the rat. Where is the cat? Pat, pat, pat." And this was published in the Shanghai American School newspaper. And right beside it is a letter from the second grade teacher, Miss Essex Shields, which says, "The second grader's work is not up to our usual standards this week." So my first published work appeared alongside my first critical review. And so did anyone think that I had the makings of a writer as a child? Not a soul. And I never thought I would be a writer. And I just became a writer because I was asked to write something for the church. I had a professor in what is now a seminary, but it was what women were allowed to go to in my day. And she said, "Have you ever thought of being a writer?" And I said, "No, I wouldn't want to add another mediocre writer to the world." Yeah. I mean, I was an English major. I knew what great literature was. And she said, "Well, maybe that is what God is calling you to be." And I did not become a writer because I thought God had plenty of mediocre writers. He didn't need me to add to the list. But she got me my first writing job. She was determined I become a writer, and she was very happy to take credit for the fact that I became a writer. Who's my favorite writer?
Who's your favorite writer, and what's your favorite book?
Well, we were having this discussion at supper one night at the old folks' home, and I said, St. Paul. And everybody was a little bit shocked. I mean, he's pretty sexist. But no, I used to say it was a toss-up between Sigrid Undset and Leo Tolstoy. I like Tolstoy better than, what's his name, because he's happier. But among modern writers, I love Marilyn Robinson. I think Gilead is absolutely wonderful book. What's his name? the man who wrote The Gentleman from Moscow. I love that book, and all the light we cannot see. I mean, there's a lot of wonderful writing going on these days. It just not world enough of time. I stop and write a book, and it interrupts my good writing, my good reading. And a lot of wonderful work for children. I recently read a book that was a honor book for the Newbery last year called Fighting Words by Kimberly Brubaker Bradley. Boy, that's a wraparound name for a book jacket, isn't it? And my mother got all upset because I wouldn't put Katherine Paterson on my books. I thought, I'm glad she didn't live to see Kimberly Brubaker Bradley. But Fighting Words is absolutely magnificent book for mature young readers. It's tough, very tough, but it's really good. She also wrote The War That Saved My Life, which is wonderful.
The author. He's asking the authors. Fighting Words?
Fighting Words.
Fighting
Words. She has a wonderful thing in that book because she knew that she couldn't get by with a lot of cuss words. So she has the older sister say to the child who cusses all the time, every time you use a word like that, you're going to be sent to the principal's office. So just substitute the word snow. Well, of course, it snows all over that book. And I said I saw Kim recently, and I said, you realize that a lot of us are sitting there trying to figure out what this particular snow stands for, don't you? But I thought it was a genius way to get around the problem, which would mean that practically no library or school could buy the book if you were totally honest with the language that a child like that would be speaking.
Right, creative way to be authentic to that character.
But she's a wonderful writer.
So, oh, snow. It's time to call the conversation to an end. But thank you so much, Katherine, and thank you so much, Lindsay, for this lovely conversation. It was an absolute delight to hear. Katherine has agreed to stay and sign books, so you would have another chance to chat with her if you like. And Nancy has agreed to stay and sell books, so that's convenient.
And I have to say thank you all for coming and being such a wonderful audience. I really do appreciate it.